Big week for campaigners as well. Now, when we spoke to Carole Gould, who's a mother of the murdered teenager Ellie Gould, just 3 days ago, that's on Sunday, she was hopeful that the government would significantly increase sentences for those who violently kill women. We now know, thanks to a letter from Dominic Raab, that they're only planning to add around 2 years for aggravating factors like the use of excessive or gratuitous violence beyond that necessary to kill. Well, she joins us now, I'm glad to say. Thank you so much for coming on the programme again at such short notice. I wasn't expecting you to be interviewing you again 3 days later, but I'm very glad to have you. If we could just start, if I may, by if you just remind viewers about what happened to your daughter Ellie.
So Ellie was dating a fellow student. She was just 17 years old. It was only a 3-month relationship, but after a couple of months, he became controlling over her and suffocating, and she decided to end the relationship. He then came to our house the following day, and he strangled her, and he stabbed her 13 times in the neck. Um, and then he just walked out of our house as though nothing had happened.
It's
And
extraordinary to hear.
yeah, it is shocking, and to this day we still can't quite believe it's happened. So we had some hope after the Claire Wade review that Overkill would finally be recognising the sentencing, because the sentencing the perpetrator got was just 12 and a half years. Um, and I was absolutely devastated when on Monday I saw the letter that Dominic Raab had sent to his colleagues saying that they were considering just an increase of sentencing for 2 years. You know, in one breath, they're saying that, that they acknowledge the horror of overkill and the anguish it causes to families. And in the next breath, they're saying, but we're going to, and then we'll increase sentencing by 2 years. If I can,
You're named in that letter as well, aren't you? Dominic
I,
Raab. It's a letter
I
to
believe,
MPs. He
yeah,
names you
yeah.
in the campaigning that you've done.
Yeah, and I mean, it's heartbreaking. All the campaigning we've been doing, myself and Julie Devi, to try and level up this sentencing between domestic homicides and murders that happen in the street. And we were really hoping that the 10-year difference would be levelled up, but it looks like it's not going to be much more than 2 years. And if I could just talk a little bit about the anguish that you go through as parents. We had to visit Ellie in the morgue, and they had to cover up her neck and her face with bandages and plasters so that we couldn't see the full extent of her injuries. Poppy's parents have a 25-page document detailing her 112 injuries. That's the anguish and the heartbreak that we live with every day, knowing how our beautiful girls were murdered. And, just adding 2 years for that is an absolute insult to us. And I think Minister Arger and Dominic Raab owe it to us to have their meeting face to face, look in our eyes, and explain to us how they have come up with just adding 2 years for the horrific nature of these crimes. And I'd be really interested to hear how they have come up with that figure of just two years to add to the sentence.
Well, that's something that we can certainly see if it happens or not. If you do get that face-to-face meeting with those ministers, do you feel that you've been, misled perhaps is perhaps too strong a word, but do you think that you've been given assurances or hope that things would have been different?
Absolutely. I mean, we can't quite understand why they're consulting on coercive control in relationships having a starting point of 25 years, when 50% of domestic homicides experience that, but 60% of the domestic homicides experience overkill. So why are they not consulting on that being a 25-year starting point? And what we've found with these murders is that you can't rely on the judges to deliver the correct sentence. If, in our case, the judge took 2 years off of Griffith's sentence just because his grandparents wrote a character reference, because he'd never been in trouble with the police before, which I think is pretty irrelevant when you've just committed the most heinous crime. And for his remorse letter, well, the details in his remorse letter were not genuine remorse. He didn't explain why he did what he did. He said, I hope one day I can explain myself. Well, to me, that isn't genuine remorse at all. And for those very negligible things, he got 2 years off his sentence. Yet you flip it the other way, and for the most horrific, violent, frenzied attack, the government are only prepared to add 2 years. It's all completely wrong. And that's why we were arguing to have it actually written into law, a 25-year starting point for overkill, so that judges can't get it wrong.
You talk a bit about the difference between domestic murders and murders on the streets. And I think it's just quite important to talk about a little bit more about what you mean by that. Do you think that there has been, I guess, a prejudice, perhaps a sort of anti-woman bias in the system, where if a murder is committed within the home or within a relationship, it's somehow taken less seriously?
Yeah, totally. These murders are not taken with the seriousness they deserve. You know, if you take a knife out in the street and stab somebody once in the park, the starting point for sentencing for that is 25 years. If you obliterate somebody in the home, very violent, frenzied attack, the starting point for sentencing for that is 15 years. And the justification for that is that you can't prove it was premeditated, which quite honestly is nonsense, because the perpetrator doesn't need to bring a weapon to the scene to prove premeditation, because they often live with the victim. They know where the weapon is. And many of these perpetrators use their hands. So you will never prove premeditation if they're using their hands, because your hands are a weapon and they travel with you. It just diminishes the crime. It's insulting to women. It's just so wrong. And we really thought this was a watershed moment with this Claire Wade review. And all the talk of the government about coming down hard on violence against women and girls, well, this is a bit of disappointment, because they're not, are they? So I think we need to get round the table with Minister Argar and have an honest and frank conversation. I have contacted some MPs that I've had dealings with in the past, and the general feeling is that this is wrong. My own MP, James Gray, raised this at oral questions to the Justice Minister yesterday, and I publicly thank him for that. And I've had some very positive response from Caroline Notes, who is going to raise this directly with Minister Argar.
OK. Well, look, we're going to keep pursuing your story with you. It's a privilege to speak to you. And I know you were talking about the thing that no parent wants to see, which is your child, you know, with bandages around her neck and her face. But we've been looking at some beautiful pictures of your daughter this evening. She looks happy, she looks radiant, and, you know, I can tell how loved she was. So thank you so much for being on the programme again. We appreciate it.
Thank you for following it. Thank you very much, Sophie.